A letter sealed not with wax, but with ashes of the past. Welcome to Vale Files. I am your host, Thorn. Drop a comment below. Where in the world are you listening from? Your words make this community remarkable. Now, the case. It was on one of those raw November evenings, when the mist lay low over London and the gas lamps gave but a feeble glow through the yellow fog, that I first became aware of the peculiar case that would so wholly engage Holmes's attention in the weeks to follow. We had just returned to Baker Street after a dreary day of rain, and Holmes, stretched languidly upon the settee, had taken to his violin with that curious mixture of melancholy and absorption which marked his moods when his faculties were not actively engaged. I had settled by the fire with the evening papers when Mrs. Hudson announced that a gentleman sought immediate counsel. Without waiting for invitation, the door opened, and there entered a figure of singular agitation, a young barrister, perhaps 30 years of age, whose dishevelled dress and hurried step bespoke some urgent matter. His pale features were accentuated by the shadows of the lamplight, and he clutched in his hand what appeared to be an envelope already darkened and crumbling at the edges. "Mr. Holmes," he began, breathless, "I beg your forgiveness for this intrusion. My name is Edward Chalmers, and I bring to you a matter of the most pressing gravity. Scotland Yard has dismissed it as trifling, yet I fear it may cost more than reputation, perhaps even life itself." Holmes lowered his bow and regarded the visitor with that piercing gaze which seemed to strip a man bare of all pretences. "You have come to the right place, Mr. Chalmers," he said quietly. "Pray sit down. You are in some difficulty connected with a letter, I see." Chalmers started violently, glancing at the brittle paper in his grip. "How on earth?" Holmes permitted himself the faintest of smiles. "The ashes upon your sleeve and the scorched corner of that envelope are eloquent enough. But tell us plainly, sir, what is this matter that drives you here at such an hour?" Chalmers, visibly shaken, drew the letter from its envelope. The parchment was charred as though plucked from a fire, yet the wax seal, blackened, half-melted, still bore the impression of an unfamiliar crest. "This was delivered to my chambers yesterday by a messenger who vanished before I could question him. The seal was unbroken when I received it. Yet when I opened it, the contents were not words at all, but ashes. Ashes, Mr. Holmes, carefully folded and placed within. I confess a chill passed over me at his words. Ashes where words should be, an omen, a warning, or some strange cipher." Holmes leaned forward, his sharp features illuminated by the firelight. His long, nervous fingers caressed the envelope as though it were a living thing. "A letter sealed with ashes," he murmured. "Most curious indeed. It is not a threat in words, but a threat in symbol. Mr. Chalmers, I believe we must tread carefully, for this is no trifling jest. Tell me, who might wish to see you silenced without a word?" The young barrister hesitated, glancing toward the door as if fearful of unseen ears. "That, Mr. Holmes, is precisely why I have come. For I suspect the answer lies not in who knows me, but in what I have discovered." He broke off, his eyes darting nervously toward the window where the fog pressed close against the pane. Holmes rose at once, his interest fully aroused. "Watson," he said briskly, "make a note of this case at once. I believe we stand at the threshold of a most singular mystery, and thus began the case of the letter sealed with ashes." Holmes did not at once resume his violin, nor did he besiege our visitor with questions as a lesser mind might have done. Instead, he crossed to the mantel, turned the envelope and its singular burden this way and that beneath the lamplight, and then, with that absent air which boded the most exacting attention, he placed a porcelain saucer upon the table, and, with the blade of his knife, tipped a pinch of the grey residue upon it. He drew his chair close, his keen profile cut in cameo against the fire, and breathed upon the little heap, watching how the finest particles lifted and then fell again. "You will oblige me, Mr. Chalmers," he said at last, "by answering 2 questions before a third becomes unnecessary. At what hour was this delivered, and what precise street did your messenger enter when he left your chambers?" The barrister had regained a portion of his composure. "Yesterday, a little after 4. The boy, if boy he was, came up the stair 2 at a time, thrust the envelope into my clerk's hand, and was off again before a syllable could detain him. I pursued, but he turned into Middle Temple Lane and from there toward Fleet Street. By the time I reached the pavement, he had melted into the crowd." Holmes inclined his head. "And your clerk, capable, but not observant. I can see it in the timid slope of your writing upon this address, which is not your usual hand, but one. Adopted to calm an excitable subordinate, you allowed him to redirect his energies rather than scold him for letting a messenger slip. Admirable kindness, but of little use to us now." He touched the ash with a moistened fingertip, rubbed, then sniffed the residue with a fastidious wrinkle of the nose. "Not paper alone. There is bone in this, ground bone, yet also the flat, sooty crumble of charred rag. A curious mixture. Watson," the lens I handed the familiar instrument across. Through it, the grey field resolved into little continents, some pearly white, granular and friable, others black and flake-like as burnt leaves, and here and there a glittering mote as though a pin's head of glass had been melted and refrozen. "Sealing wax," Holmes murmured, indicating the glassy specks. "And this white, phosphatic, the ash of bone or ivory. Now observe this thread, Watson, crimson, fused at the end. I have seen such ribbons too often in your province, Mr. Chalmers, to mistake them. The pink tape that binds a brief Chalmers' eyes widened. Good Lord. Your letter contained ashes of at least 2 things, Holmes continued, of which one was a law brief, a bundle tied with a pink ribbon, reduced to this state while still bound, for the fused end shows the ribbon's extremity was exposed to flame. The bone ash suggests that something else, perhaps a fragment of ivory or bone, was burned with it. Gentlemen do not keep billiard balls in their briefs, and counsel seldom file their arguments upon piano keys. What, then, accompanies legal papers and contains bone? A penknife? Chalmers floundered. A seal, Holmes said softly, tapping the half-melted stamp upon the back. Many a family seal stone is set into a ring with a rim of bone or ivory. But here the seal remains half intact, whereas the bone ash lies within. We are warned in symbol by men who think in emblems. Fire is their language, the motto around this crest. What we can recover of it will tell us more. He held the envelope nearer the light. The blackened wax still bore, in its unconsumed arc, the humped back of some salamander-like creature amid stylized tongues of flame. Around it ran a Latin motto, eaten away at one side. Holmes wetted his finger and stroked the soot from the rim. Quod flamma non consume it, he read aloud. What the flame does not consume, that is impudence of the first order. Do you know the crest? I asked. I know 100, said he, and forget 1,000. This, no, but the blazon is not provincial. It smells of money. New money, likely. Old families prefer leopards, chevrons, and other respectable menageries. A salamander is the pretension of a house that wishes the world to observe how cheerfully it passes through fire. Mr. Chalmers, we have trifled long enough with symbols. Tell me plainly what you have discovered, and who it would inconvenience. Our visitor's hand tightened upon his hat. He drew a slow breath, as if to steady himself upon a slab of self-respect. I am junior counsel, said he to Mr. Gervase Latham in the matter of Carston versus Carston, a chancery affair that has already consumed 2 winters in procedure. The late Sir Giles Carston died last year, leaving a substantial estate and a coal concern, Carston and Wyatt, whose furnaces and retorts spread over many acres by the river in Southwark. By the will, the property descends to his niece, Miss Margaret Brabazon, unless a certain codicil, executed, so it is alleged, upon the last night of Sir Giles's life, can be proved. We act for Miss Brabazon. The opposing side is led by Mr. Gerald Wycherley, a man whose reputation for success is exceeded only by the peculiar manner of attaining it. His mouth tightened. Forgive me, I should not traduce a brother of the bar. But I have cause. Your cause is the ashes, Holmes said, serenely implacable. What did you find? 3 days since, Chalmers continued, there came into my hands a clerk's memorandum, misfiled these many months, describing the existence of an earlier codicil made a week before the last, by which Sir Giles confirmed his original disposition to Miss Brabazon. It was witnessed by his physician, Dr. Peregrine Vale, and by a foreman from the works. The later instrument, the one invoked by the opposing side, names instead Mr. Aubrey Wyatt, son of Sir Giles's partner, as residuary legatee. That later document bears witnesses whose names are a very echo of convenience. Holmes's eyes glinted. You suspected forgery? I dared not say the word, Chalmers answered miserably. I am young, Mr. Latham is cautious, and Mr. Wycherley is powerful. Yet I took the memorandum to our instructing solicitor, Mr. Heriot. He bade me locate Dr. Vale forthwith. I went to the physician's rooms in Arundel Street. He had removed to Brighton a fortnight earlier. I returned by way of the Temple, stopped at my chambers to fetch a notebook, and there encountered the messenger and his infernal letter. When I opened it and found ashes where a letter should be, I confessed that I trembled. I am no coward, Mr. Holmes, but the thing had a theatrical villainy that unstrung me. I sent at once to Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade came, glanced, sniffed, and smiled in the way he reserves for the unworldly. He advised me to spend less time reading romances and more upon briefs. It was then I resolved to trouble you. Holmes's fingers steepled themselves. You did not err in the address. The memorandum, do you have it? Chalmers drew from an inner pocket a folded sheet, its edges roughened with much turning. Holmes read it, once quickly, and then again with a pause at the signatures. The foreman is named here, Thomas Rooke. And Dr. Vale, we know. 2 witnesses sufficient in law. If this earlier codicil stands, the later one must be scrutinized to the marrow. The opposing solicitor argues that the earlier was revoked by the later, Chalmers said. But if the later is impugned, precisely, then whoever profits by the later codicil would profit by the destruction of any record of the earlier, Holmes concluded. He tapped the saucer. You see, Watson, the ashes are not a random terror. They are an assertion. We have burned the paper that would save you. Only, and here his voice sank, these men are foolishly proud. They have mixed their boast with a badge, bone ash, law rag, fused ribbon, melted wax. They could not restrain their love of the theatrical. It is a vice we shall encourage until it betrays them. He rose and paced once, twice, with that lithe energy which transformed him from languor to a blade of concentrated. Will, Mr. Chalmers, we must move along 3 lines. First, we must learn whether Dr. Vale indeed witnessed such a paper, and, if so, whether he yet lives to say so. Second, we must find Thomas Rooke. If he still labours in Southwark, we shall have the truth from him before any stage manager of ashes can rehearse it. Third, and this at once, we must trace your messenger. The boy? I asked. Holmes shook his head. A boy in shape, perhaps. But note the knot upon this ribbon fragment. It is the quick, single-handed knot of a man who ties parcels for a living, not the clumsy hitch of a child. And the soot upon the flap of the envelope, look here, has smeared inward as well as out. The hand that sealed this had soot upon the fingers. London has many trades that will begrime a man so, sweepers, stokers, the men at the gasworks. But observe the odour, do you catch it? Not of common coal alone, there is a faint whiff of naphtha. That sends us from the kitchen range to the retort house. Carston and Wyatt, I said, recalling his mention of the works at Southwark. Just so. He smiled without mirth. Our salamander is nearer the river than I had hoped. Mr. Chalmers, the crest and motto, have you seen them before? He hesitated. Sir Giles kept a seal with a lizard upon it. I thought it a whim. Mr. Wyatt, I believe, adopted it for the firm. I cannot swear to the motto, "We shall not ask you to swear to anything tonight," Holmes replied, his tone gentler. "You will go home, bolt your door, and answer no knocks that come after midnight. Before you sleep, you will write to Mr. Latham, informing him that you have retained private counsel to assist in tracing witnesses, say nothing of threats, still less of Ashes. In the morning, Watson and I shall pay our respects to Southwark. Chalmers' relief broke through his gravity. "You give me back my courage, Mr. Holmes." "I do better," said Holmes with a little bow. "I propose to give you back your case." He rang for Mrs. Hudson and requested tea, a summons which, under ordinary circumstances, meant he had completed some delicate chain of reasoning and sought only the comfort of warmth before action. While our landlady busied herself with the tray, Holmes took up the envelope once more and studied the address as one might a map. "This hand," he observed, "is a clerk's educated hand, trained to conceal its personality. Yet it cannot conceal its schooling. The long S in esque has a flourish taught by a single master. I have met it in ledgers from a particular bank upon the Borough High Street. I do not say our writer is a banker, merely that men who deal with those books often echo their letters. It is a trifle. We collect trifles. When Mrs. Hudson had withdrawn, he went to his chemical shelf and returned with a little vial. He shook a few drops upon the ash. At once the white particles took a faint yellow tint. "A nitrate," he said. "Bone char washed with nitrate is used in refining sugar and, more to the point, in certain filtration processes at gasworks. Our gentlemen have scooped this triumphant message from a place where bone char is plentiful. They could not help but carry some of it along." Chalmers drew himself up. "Shall I accompany you to the works?" "You shall do no such thing," Holmes replied crisply. "Your face is known to the other side if I do not misjudge Mr. Wycherley's diligence. Mine, in another guise, is not. Watson, a hint of the river about me and the addition of a scar upon the cheek will suffice. I will be a night stoker, seeking a shift. There is a talk a man understands in the hiss of steam, and another he understands at the bottom of a quart. Between them, a stoker will tell you where the boys run messages, and for whom." He turned to Chalmers again. "One thing more. In your pursuit yesterday, did you notice a cart upon Fleet Street marked with white letters upon a black board, 'Wyatt'? Anything of that sort?" Chalmers frowned in effort. A coal dray stood at the corner of Fetter Lane. "The name upon it, yes. Wyatt and Company, Southwark. But surely half the carts in London bear the same." "Half," said Holmes dryly. "Do not pause within sight of a man who wishes his visitor to vanish." I could not repress an exclamation. "You think the messenger joined the dray?" "I think," said Holmes, "that a salamander leaves a warm trail. We shall see how quickly ashes cool when the fire is watched." He took Chalmers by the arm and led him to the door with a kindness that sat oddly upon his sardonic features. Our client stammered his thanks and went down the stairs with a firmer tread. Holmes stood listening until the outer door closed, then glanced at the clock upon the mantel. 11, he said. "The retort house will not sleep yet. Watson, your thickest coat. We are for Southwark." The fog lay thick upon the embankment as we crossed the river by Blackfriars Bridge. Holmes, walking at that brisk, purposeful pace which signalled that his mind had already set its course. The lamps were blurred halos, and from somewhere downstream the mournful cry of a steamer's horn echoed like a warning through the night. I pulled my collar close against the damp air, but Holmes seemed impervious to it, his tall figure cutting through the haze like a mast through sea mist. "Note, Watson," he said, lowering his voice as though the very fog might conspire against us, "the geography of this affair. Southwark, gasworks, bone char. The trade is in fire and ashes. Nothing could be more apt for men who choose their emblems so theatrically. A firm that prides itself on walking through flame will not resist boasting in ashes. They cannot help but reveal themselves." We turned down a narrow lane, the smell of tar and burnt gas heavy upon the air. The gasworks loomed before us, a monstrous silhouette of iron and chimney against the shrouded sky. Great gas holders rose like slumbering giants, and from the retort houses a dull, intermittent roar and hiss carried across the river breeze. A watchman's lantern bobbed by the gate, its yellow circle cutting a faint path through the murk. Holmes slowed, his manner altering in an instant. He hunched his shoulders, shuffled his stride, and muttered as though to himself, the perfect imitation of a weary stoker seeking employ. "You will remain a pace behind, Watson," he whispered. "A doctor accompanying a stoker would be remarkable indeed. Better you observe quietly and step in only if necessity compels it." I nodded, and we approached the gate. The watchman, a burly fellow with soot ground into his very pores, lifted his lantern and gave us a curt once-over. "What do you want?" "Shift work," Holmes growled, in a voice so transformed I could scarcely have believed it his. "Was told there might be a place for a man who knows his way about a furnace." He tugged at his sleeve, revealing the scar he had painted earlier, and the watchman's suspicion softened. "You've the look of one, right enough," said he. "We're short in the East House tonight. Best see Foreman Wills." He jerked his thumb toward a low door where the light of a furnace pulsed like a living heart. Holmes muttered his thanks and shuffled forward, while I lingered in the shadow of the gate. Through the open doorway I could see the retort house, a cavernous space filled with the glow of furnaces. Men moved like shades through the haze, their faces streaked with soot, their voices drowned in the roar of fire. I caught glimpses of Holmes within, already conversing with a foreman whose manner was half suspicion, half acceptance, born of desperate need for labour. Minutes passed, 10, perhaps 15, before Holmes re-emerged, his gait still stooped but his eyes alive with triumph. He came straight to me, drawing me aside into the cover of a wall. "Well, Watson," he said in his natural tone once more, "we are upon a trail hotter than the furnaces themselves. Our mysterious messenger is no myth. A boy is indeed employed here for errands, though boy is a courtesy, for he is near 20, but slight of build. The men call him Finch. He was out yesterday afternoon, and none will say for whom, but the foreman let fall one indiscretion. Finch runs most often to the office of Mr. Aubrey Wyatt himself." "The legatee?" I exclaimed. "The same." Sir Giles's partner's son, the very man who stands to gain by the later codicil. A coincidence too perfect to be natural. And yet we must not leap. What interests me more is that Finch has, within the week, boasted of errands to the Temple. He was seen polishing his boots with unusual care before one such excursion. Our ash letter may have been his handiwork. Holmes's voice sank as a group of stokers passed by, their laughter coarse and weary. "When they were gone," he continued, "we must contrive a meeting with this Finch. But not here, where questions breed suspicion. I have learned that he frequents a tavern called the Salamander's Rest, a low haunt by the river where gasmen and coal heavers take their mugs. The very name is a coincidence, or an admission. Shall we test its fire, Watson?" The tavern was but a quarter-hour's walk, down winding alleys where the gas lamps grew thin, and the cobbles gleamed with damp. It squatted at the corner of a lane, its signboard, painted with a garish lizard amid flames, swinging creakily above the door. The windows oozed smoke and lamplight, and the din of voices reached us even in the street. Holmes straightened his posture slightly, brushed soot from his sleeve, and whispered, "You shall be my companion, Doctor, but do not address me by name. Tonight I am John Price, stoker." We entered. The air was a foul mixture of beer, smoke, and sweat. Men crowded the benches, tankards clattering, voices raised in rough mirth. Holmes shouldered his way through with the assurance of one accustomed to such places, and we found a corner table from which he could survey the room with those hawk's eyes that missed nothing. It was not long before our quarry appeared, a thin youth, scarcely more than a boy, with sharp features and restless eyes, pushed through the crowd. He bore himself with a swagger ill-suited to his ragged coat, and from his pocket protruded a strip of pink ribbon, the same hue as that which Holmes had shown us fused among the ashes. He flung himself upon a bench, ordered ale with a flourish, and began boasting to a circle of companions. "Observe," Holmes murmured, never turning his head. "The ribbon. He flaunts it like a trophy. He has not the wit to know it betrays him. Let us listen." We strained our ears. The youth, flushed with ale, spoke loudly of errands in the temple, of messages for gentlemen who pay well to have their business carried unseen. He mimed thrusting a packet into a clerk's hand, and his companions roared with laughter. At one point he pulled from his pocket a half-melted lump of red wax and tossed it onto the table as though it were nothing more than a trinket. My heart leapt, for the mark upon it was that same salamander crest. Holmes's hand brushed my sleeve in warning. "Patience, Watson. He will betray himself more fully yet," and indeed he did. The youth leaned closer to his fellows and hissed, "They think to frighten the barrister with ashes. Ashes, I say, as if the law can rise from cinders. Let him try and prove his paper when all he holds is dust." At that, Holmes rose. He moved with deceptive casualness to the bar, ordered a drink, and let fall a remark about work at the gasworks. Within moments he had drawn Finch's eye. The boy, eager to display his importance, drifted over. "You from the works?" he asked, narrowing his gaze. Holmes nodded. "East House, name's Price, I hear you. Run messages for the gaffers." The boy grinned, tapping the lump of wax on the bar. "Messages and more. Some men pay in coin, others in secrets. Makes no odds to Finch. If it burns, it burns." Holmes chuckled darkly. "A brave trade, but dangerous, eh? A man might choke on the smoke of another's fire." The boy shrugged. "Not if he keeps his mouth shut." Holmes leaned close, his tone confidential. "And if a man did speak? If he did, best mind your own fire, stoker," before slinking back to his companions. Holmes returned to our corner, his expression thoughtful. "We have enough, Watson." He has all but confessed. Yet to press him further now would be folly. He is frightened, but not broken. Tomorrow, in the clear light of day, we shall find where he lodges, and then the truth will come without ale to cloud it. For tonight, let us leave him to his boasting. We finished our drinks in silence, the noise of the tavern swirling around us. When at last we stepped back into the fog-bound street, the air seemed colder, heavier, as though the shadows themselves had drawn closer. Holmes adjusted his coat and quickened his stride. "The game has begun in earnest, Watson," he said. "We have seen the salamander at play. Tomorrow we shall learn whether its fire consumes only paper, or men as well." The morning broke raw and grey, the fog clinging still to the river, and muffling the sound of traffic upon the bridge. Holmes had been restless through the night, pacing the length of our sitting-room while I dozed in my chair, and when at last I roused myself fully, he was already at the window, pipe in hand, gazing out upon Baker Street as though divining some unseen pattern in the drift of the mist. "Up, Watson," he said briskly. "The youth Finch is not likely to be stirring yet, but men of his sort seldom keep lodgings far from their work. A half-day's inquiry should yield his residence. Once we have that, the rest will follow." I fortified myself with coffee while Holmes dispatched 2 notes by express messenger, one to Inspector Lestrade, summoning him discreetly to be within call, and the other, I suspect, to a private informant of his in Southwark. By the time we set out, his mood had grown keen, his eyes glittering with that peculiar fire which I knew to be the herald of discovery. The streets of Southwark bustled despite the lingering fog. Costermongers cried their wares, carts rattled over the cobbles, and the smoke of the great gasworks drifted like a dark pennant over the district. Holmes moved among the throng with his usual sure-footed confidence, pausing only to question a sweep here, a coster there, or to examine the chalk mark upon a doorpost that might, to another, have seemed meaningless. By noon he had pieced together a line of evidence so neat that I could not but marvel. "Finch lodges yonder," he declared, pointing to a row of mean houses backing onto the river. "Number 12, a woman at the corner fish stall knows him as a tenant. A coalman confirms it by describing his thin frame and restless eyes. He has not been seen since midnight, which suggests that our appearance at the tavern troubled him more than he showed. Let us see what the inside of his room may tell us." We approached the door of number 12, a grimy dwelling with peeling paint and windows clouded by neglect. Holmes rapped smartly. After a pause, a slatternly woman with a shawl drawn about her shoulders appeared, eyeing us with suspicion. "Mr. Finch?" Holmes asked. "He's out," she snapped. "Don't know when he'll be back, neither. Never keeps regular hours." Holmes pressed a coin into her hand with such practised indifference that she softened at once. "We are friends come to fetch him," he said smoothly. "Might we wait inside? The cold is devilish this morning." The woman hesitated, then shrugged and admitted us. She led us up a narrow stair to a garret at the back. The air within was rank, the single window filmed with soot. A heap of clothes lay upon the bed, and the floor was littered with scraps of paper, half-burnt matches, and the dried drippings of sealing wax. Holmes surveyed the room with a satisfaction he did not attempt to disguise. He moved methodically, picking up each fragment and storing it in an envelope. At length he uncovered, beneath a loose board, a bundle of pink ribbon ends, some scorched, others merely cut. Beside them lay the remnant of a seal, its surface impressed with the salamander crest. "Proof positive, Watson," he murmured. "Our youth is the hand that carried the ashes. He has been careless, but the pride of such creatures is their ruin. Observe this ribbon. It is of the same weave as the fused piece we examined last night, and here the crest itself, abandoned as though he thought it of no consequence. Foolish vanity! He has kept his trophies, yet hidden them too poorly." Even as he spoke, footsteps sounded upon the stair. Holmes's eyes gleamed. He motioned me to remain silent and drew back into the shadow. The latch lifted, and Finch himself entered, his face pale, his manner hurried. He started violently on perceiving us, and for a moment I feared he would bolt, but Holmes stepped forward, calm and commanding. "Good morning, Mr. Bullfinch," he said, evenly. "You have been abroad early. May I suggest that frankness would suit you better than flight?" The youth's eyes darted from Holmes to me and back again. His hand twitched toward his pocket, but Holmes's gaze held him like steel. He sagged at last into a chair, muttering curses under his breath. "What do you want of me?" he snarled. "Only the truth," Holmes replied. "You carried a letter yesterday to the chambers of Mr. Edward Chalmers. That letter contained ashes. You delivered it on behalf of Mr. Aubrey Wyatt Finch's lips trembled. "I don't know the name." "Lies waste your time as well as mine," Holmes cut in sharply. "This seal," he held up the fragment, "was found in your room. It bears the salamander crest of the Wyatt family. Speak honestly, Finch, and you may yet save yourself from the ruin toward which you hasten." The youth shifted uneasily, his bravado slipping. "I was told to carry packets, that's all." "Never asked what was in 'em, but you knew this one contained ashes," Holmes pressed. "You boasted of it at the Salamander's Rest. You said the barrister could prove nothing from dust. Who instructed you to say that?" Finch's face drained of colour. No one. I was drunk. I didn't mean—" Holmes's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. "Then allow me to put the matter plainly. You have been made a tool in a scheme to suppress a will, to threaten those who would uphold justice, and perhaps even to destroy evidence of fraud. The men who use you care nothing for your fate. When you are no longer useful, you will be cast aside as surely as the ashes you carried. Do you prefer that end, or will you speak?" The silence stretched. At last, Finch buried his face in his hands. "It was Wyatt," he whispered hoarsely. "Mr. Aubrey Wyatt himself. He gave me the letters, said it was a jest to frighten the young lawyer, paid me well he did, told me to keep my tongue still or I'd find myself floating in the Thames. I swear I never thought it was more than a scare. Holmes regarded him gravely. A jest that strikes at the very heart of law. Your part in it is serious enough, but your confession may yet earn leniency. You will put this in writing for Inspector Lestrade, and you will hold yourself ready to testify. The youth groaned, but offered no resistance as Holmes drew paper and pen from the desk. Under Holmes's steady dictation, Finch scrawled his statement, sealing his fate with trembling hand. When it was done, Holmes secured the paper within his pocket. "There, Watson," he said, as we descended the stair, leaving Finch pale and shaken behind us. "Our path grows clearer. Wyatt is no longer a shadow behind the flame. He stands revealed as one who would play with fire to secure his fortune. Yet this is but the beginning. To accuse is not to prove. We must have Dr. Vale and the foreman Rook, or our case will founder. The law demands witnesses, not conjecture." We stepped once more into the murky street, where the fog had thickened again, cloaking the river in mystery. Holmes hailed a cab, and as we climbed inside, his gaze grew distant, his mind already racing ahead. "Wyatt has shown his hand too soon," he mused. He thought to terrify Chalmers, to warn him from pursuing the memorandum. But the very extravagance of the gesture betrays desperation. There is something more, some fact we have not yet glimpsed, that drives him to such lengths. We must find it, Watson, before the ashes spread further. As the cab rattled northward, I could not shake the chill that clung to me. For all Holmes's confidence, I sensed that the fire into which we had stepped was no ordinary blaze, but one that threatened to consume all in its path, and I wondered, not without unease, whether even Holmes himself could walk through such flames unscathed. Our cab rattled across the cobblestones with a speed that made conversation difficult, but Holmes, his eyes fixed upon the fog-veiled streets beyond the window, seemed far removed from such practical discomforts. He sat forward, fingers steepled, and every now and again a faint, sardonic smile touched his lips, as though some internal calculation had reached a satisfactory stage. I had long since learned not to intrude upon such meditations until he himself chose to speak, and so I watched him in silence, content to let his mind travel ahead of us. At last, as the cab turned into Fleet Street and the lamps came into view like blurred stars through the mist, he roused himself. "Watson, you will accompany me to Lincoln's Inn. There we shall find Mr. Latham, the senior counsel in this matter, and place before him the confession of our youthful messenger. He must understand the danger to his client's cause, and he must prepare for a battle more arduous than any mere wrangle over codicils, for I suspect that in the ashes lies a truth more damning than forgery alone." I pressed him for an explanation, but he merely shook his head. "Patience, my dear fellow. We shall see what light Mr. Latham can cast upon Wyatt's desperation. There is a reason, beyond avarice, that has driven him to this folly. Men do not burn papers with mottos unless some deeper flame scorches their conscience. We found Mr. Gervase Latham in his chambers, a tall, thin man with hair prematurely silvered and an expression of perpetual caution. He rose at our entrance, greeting Holmes with the courtesy due to one whose name was known even among the austere circles of Chancery. At sight of the paper, Holmes drew from his pocket, however. His composure faltered. "You have a confession?" he exclaimed, adjusting his spectacles. Holmes laid Finch's trembling scrawl upon the desk. "Your junior, mister? Chalmers was threatened yesterday by means of a letter filled with ashes. We have traced its bearer, secured his admission, and learned that he was employed directly by Mr. Aubrey Wyatt. There can be no mistake." Latham's lips pressed thin. He read swiftly, his brow darkening. "This is grave indeed." "Wyatt is reckless, but to leave evidence of his own intimidation, this borders upon madness." "Madness is often but desperation by another name," Holmes observed. "Pray tell us, sir, What cause Wyatt might have to fear this memorandum of an earlier codicil? Surely he could rely upon the later will unless its foundation be unsound. Latham hesitated, then leaned closer. "Between ourselves, mister. Holmes, I have long harboured doubts. The later codicil was witnessed by two of Wyatt's associates, clerks in his father's employ. Their testimony will no doubt withstand casual scrutiny, but it bears the reek of convenience. Still, without Dr. Vale or this foreman Rook, the earlier codicil rests upon a clerk's memorandum alone. That would scarce convince a court, and yet Wyatt trembles at its discovery," Holmes mused. "He sends ashes to silence your junior. He parades emblems of flame. I begin to see the outline of his fear. Tell me, what know you of Sir Giles's last illness?" Latham removed his spectacles and polished them with deliberate care. "It was said to be pneumonia, contracted after exposure at the works. But there were whispers, unfounded, I thought, that he was not tended as he might have been." Dr. Vale attended him daily. "If the man could be found—" Holmes interrupted sharply. "He must be found. Send word to your solicitor to telegraph Brighton this hour. We require Vale's testimony without delay. As for the foreman Rook, I shall attend to him myself. He may prove less elusive." Latham inclined his head. "Mr. Holmes, I place the matter entirely in your hands. Should you succeed, Miss Brabazon will owe you more than her inheritance. She will owe you her peace of mind." We left him thus, grave and thoughtful. In the cab, Holmes was silent again, but his eyes shone with that inward fire which told me he was threading clue to clue. Only as we crossed Waterloo Bridge did he speak. "Watson, have you considered why Sir Giles should alter his will at the last, leaving all to his partner's son? What hold had Wyatt over him? Men do not lightly disinherit their kin." I ventured some commonplace about influence or flattery, but Holmes shook his head impatiently. "No, no. There is more. I suspect coercion or worse. The truth of Sir Giles's illness is the fulcrum upon which this case turns. If Vale was forced, or if Rook was witness to foul play, then Wyatt's motive stands revealed. We must strike swiftly before Wyatt can silence them as he sought to silence Chalmers. Our course was thus set for Southwark once more, this time in search of the foreman, Thomas Rook. Holmes's inquiries the previous night had yielded a name. Now he sought the man himself. We found him at last near the wharves, a broad-shouldered fellow with coal dust ingrained into his skin and a wary expression. Holmes approached him with that disarming mixture of candour and authority which seldom failed to win confidence. "Mr. Rook," he said quietly, "I believe you once witnessed the signature of Sir Giles Carston upon a codicil to his will. Your name appears upon a memorandum now in our hands. The matter touches upon fraud of a most dangerous kind. If you value justice and your own safety, you will speak." The man started, glancing about as though the fog itself might conceal listeners. "Not here," he muttered. "Too many ears. Come with me." He led us through a maze of alleys to a small alehouse where the back room stood empty. There, with trembling hands, he drew forth a crumpled paper from his coat. "I kept this," he said hoarsely. "A copy I made for my own conscience." Sir Giles was weak but clear. He said he wished his niece to have all, and he signed before me and Dr. Vale. A week later, I was told to swear I had never seen such a thing. They threatened me, said I'd lose my position, maybe worse. I held my tongue, but when I heard talk of ashes and letters, Lord help me, I knew the fire would reach me too. Holmes examined the paper keenly. Though but a rough copy, it bore the outline of the codicil's terms. His eyes shone with triumph. "This is invaluable. With Vale's corroboration, the case will be unassailable. Rook, you have done wisely to trust us. From this hour you are under my protection. I shall place you where Wyatt's hand cannot reach." The man sank into a chair, relief warring with fear. "I'll swear to it in court, sir. Only keep them from burning me out like they done with the papers." "You shall be safe," Holmes said firmly. "But we must act with dispatch. Watson, you perceive how the flames draw nearer. First Chalmers, then Rook. Wyatt seeks to reduce every obstacle to ash. We must find Vale before the fire consumes him also." We returned to Baker Street with the precious copy secure in Holmes's pocket. As the lamps flickered to life in the gathering dusk, Lestrade arrived in response to Holmes's earlier summons. The inspector listened with growing astonishment as Holmes laid out Finch's confession and Rook's testimony. "By George, Mr. Holmes," he exclaimed, "you've the whole case mapped out. We'll have Wyatt in irons before the week is out." Holmes raised a hand. "Caution, Lestrade. To arrest him now would be premature. We require Dr. Vale. Without him, Wyatt will wriggle free, protesting slander. The law demands its witnesses, and if Vale cannot be found?" I asked. Holmes's face grew grave. "Then, Watson, we must consider that the salamander has already reached him. Let us pray we are not too late." Thus the stage was set for the next act of this singular drama. Wyatt's shadow lengthened over every clue, and though Holmes held fragments of proof, the central witness remained elusive. As night closed about London, I could not help but feel that we stood upon the brink of some darker revelation, where ashes might yet conceal a flame more deadly than any we had yet imagined. The fire burned low in our grate that evening, throwing restless shadows upon the walls of Baker Street as Holmes paced before it, his long fingers twitching at the air as though plucking invisible threads. I sat with my notes, attempting to bring order to the welter of events, but Holmes's restless energy made concentration impossible. At last he paused, his back to the flames, and spoke with sudden decision. "Watson, the time has come to strike boldly. Rook's testimony, Finch's confession. These are stout timbers, but they require the keystone of Dr. Vale. Without his voice, we risk all. We must go to Brighton tonight." The abruptness of the resolve startled me, yet I saw the logic. If Wyatt had set his hirelings upon Chalmers and Rook, he would not scruple to silence a physician whose word might unravel the very foundation of his claim. Within the hour, we were upon the late train from Victoria, the carriage rattling southward through the darkness. Holmes lay back, his eyes closed, but I could tell from the faint drumming of his fingers upon his knee that his mind was weaving ceaselessly. When at last he spoke, it was in a low tone, half to himself. "There is something about Vale that troubles me, Watson. A physician is a man of conscience, yet he has not come forward, though he must know the gravity of his testimony. Why should he hide? Fear alone does not explain it. Unless he too is entangled." The lamps flickered as the train sped on. I ventured to ask what entanglement he imagined, but Holmes only shook his head. "We shall see soon enough." We reached Brighton near midnight. The sea air blew sharp and bracing, carrying with it the faint tang of salt. Holmes had procured the address from Latham's Telegraph, a lodging-house near the Stein. The streets were quiet, save for the distant rumble of the tide and the rattle of a cab upon the stones. The house was modest, its windows dark. Holmes rang firmly, and after a time the door opened to reveal a landlady, blinking and querulous in her nightcap. Holmes's manner, when he chose, could disarm the most obstinate of souls, and within minutes we were in possession of the facts. Dr. Vale had indeed lodged there until 3 days past. He had left suddenly, saying he was called to attend a patient in London, but he had not returned. His room lay ready, undisturbed since his departure. Holmes requested to see it, and with a candle in hand we climbed the narrow stair. The chamber bore the neatness of a professional man, yet upon the dressing-table Holmes's quick eyes discerned a smear of soot, and beside it a small scrap of pink ribbon. He seized it with a cry of satisfaction. "Watson, do you see? The salamander's flame has reached even here. Vale did not leave of his own. He was fetched. And by the same hand that toys with ashes." The landlady, hearing this, grew pale and crossed herself. She could tell us no more, save that 2 men had come for the doctor, one tall and dark, the other shorter, with a scar upon his cheek. Vale had seemed uneasy, but had departed without protest, carrying his bag. Holmes questioned her closely, then pressed a coin into her hand and bade her speak to no one of our visit. Once outside, he drew a deep breath of the sea air and spoke with grim resolve. "They have him, Watson, either to coerce or to silence. We must act swiftly, or his testimony will be as cold as the ashes they send." We returned to London by the earliest train, and as the dawn broke over the city, Holmes directed our cab southward once more, toward the river. His inquiries of the previous days had familiarized him with the alleys about the gasworks, and now he guided us unerringly to a dilapidated warehouse near the river wall. Its windows were shuttered, its doors bolted, but smoke curled faintly from a vent, and within we heard the murmur of voices. Holmes motioned me to silence. He crept along the wall, peering through a crack in the boards. After a tense moment, he beckoned me. I looked, and there, in the dim interior, I saw Doctor. Vale seated upon a chair, his hands bound, his face pale but resolute. Before him stood 2 men, the tall one dark and hawk-nosed, the other squat with a scar across his cheek. They spoke in low tones, but the menace in their posture was unmistakable. Holmes drew back, his eyes alight. "We have them, Watson. Yet to charge in would be folly. 2 armed rogues against ourselves would end in disaster. We must summon aid, but quietly, lest they flee. Or worse, I proposed we fetch Lestrade, but Holmes shook his head. No time. By the hour he arrives, Vale may be no more. We must contrive a diversion." His gaze swept the alley, and presently it alighted upon a stack of coal sacks. With a swiftness that surprised me, he drew a match from his pocket and set light to a scrap of paper, thrusting it among the loose coal dust. Smoke rose at once. "Stand ready, Watson. When they come forth to see the blaze, we shall free the doctor." The plan succeeded beyond expectation. Within minutes, shouts were heard, the door burst open, and the 2 ruffians rushed out, cursing the fire. Holmes darted within, knife flashing to cut Vale's bonds, while I held the door against the return of the men. Vale staggered to his feet, his gratitude in his eyes, though his lips were mute with shock. "Come, Doctor," Holmes urged. "You are safe now, but not a moment is to be lost." We hurried him away through a maze of alleys until we reached the cab Holmes had prudently left in waiting. As we drove toward Baker Street, Vale found his voice. "You have saved me, gentlemen. They would have forced me to sign a statement, false, vile, that I had never witnessed Sir Giles's codicil. They said, if I refused, I should leave London in a coffin. I held out, though I feared each moment was my last." Holmes clasped his shoulder. "Your courage has preserved both truth and justice. You shall testify to what you saw, and Wyatt's house of ashes will collapse." Vale nodded weakly. Sir Giles was failing fast, but his mind was clear. He bade me witness the paper for his niece, and Thomas Rooke stood beside me. I signed, and so did he. "That is the truth, and I will swear it in any court." Holmes leaned back, satisfaction in every line of his face. "Then we have all we need. Finch, Rooke, and now Vale. Wyatt may boast of fire, but the flame he raised has scorched his own hands." Yet even as he spoke, a shadow of foreboding crossed his features. "Still, we must guard our witnesses closely. A salamander fights hardest when cornered. Until Wyatt himself is brought to book, none of us may sleep secure." The cab rattled on toward Baker Street, carrying with it the physician whose word could topple a fortune, and the detective whose genius had once more brought light out of smoke. But I could not shake the feeling that the fire was not yet quenched, and that before the end, the salamander's flame might flare more fiercely than ever. Dr. Vale sat huddled in our armchair at Baker Street, his hands trembling as he wrapped them around the cup of steaming tea Mrs. Hudson had pressed upon him. The lines of fear had not yet lifted from his face, but there was a steadiness in his voice as he repeated, for Holmes's satisfaction, every detail of the night Sir Giles Carstone had summoned him to witness the codicil. Holmes listened in silence, his head inclined, his eyes half closed, though I could see by the tightening of his fingers upon the arm of his chair that each word struck home. Sir Giles lay propped in bed, Vale said, his voice quavering but determined. He was pale, and the rattle of his breath told me the inflammation was deep in the lungs. Yet his mind was unclouded. He bade me fetch Thomas Rooke, who was waiting below, and in his presence and mine he dictated the terms clearly. The codicil was written, signed, and witnessed without hesitation. He was resolved that his niece should inherit. There was no mistaking his intention. Holmes opened his eyes and leaned forward. And a week later he was dead? 6 days, Vale corrected. I continued to attend him, but he grew rapidly weaker. On the final evening I was told he had executed another document. I was not asked to witness it, nor was Rooke. Only Wyatt's 2 clerks were present. It troubled me, but I was dismissed from the house and soon after received notice that my services were no longer required. Holmes exhaled slowly through his teeth. A dismissal which ensured your silence, and a codicil which transferred a fortune into the hands of Wyatt. The chain is complete. At that moment, Lestrade arrived, summoned by Holmes's note. The inspector listened to the recital with widening eyes, his blunt features a mixture of admiration and disbelief. By the Lord, Mr. Holmes, you've untangled a web fit to hang a dozen rogues. We have Finch's confession, Rooke's copy, and now Doctor, Vale himself. I'll clap irons on young Wyatt before the clock strikes midnight. Holmes raised a hand. No, Lestrade. To pounce too soon would be to play into his hands. Arrest him now, and he will feign astonishment, protest persecution, and marshal every resource of wealth and influence. He must be taken in the very act of his villainy, with the proof about him so plain that not even the cleverest counsel could contrive an escape. Lestrade frowned. And how do you propose to contrive that? Holmes's eyes gleamed. By allowing Wyatt to believe his fire has yet work to do, he thinks to burn all obstacles into ash. Let him attempt it once more, and this time we shall be waiting. Through the long hours that followed, Holmes wove his plan with the precision of a chess master, arranging the endgame. He dispatched Lestrade to place men discreetly about Southwark, where Wyatt's influence was strongest. Finch was secured in police custody, Rooke lodged secretly at an inn under assumed name, and Doctor. Vale placed under Holmes's personal protection. Each piece was moved upon the board until Holmes was satisfied that Wyatt's every step would be watched. On the 3rd day, word came that Wyatt had summoned his clerks and was preparing to leave for the works. Holmes's eyes lit with the cold fire of certainty. It is tonight, Watson. He will strike tonight. Whether by bribe, threat, or flame, he will seek to silence the last voices against him, and we shall be there when the salamander leaps into the fire. The evening was raw and gusty, the fog driven in ragged billows by the river wind. Holmes, Lestrade, and I took our positions in the shadow of a warehouse across from the Wyatt offices. Hours dragged by, broken only by the creak of a sign in the wind and the occasional rumble of a cart upon the cobbles. At last, near midnight, a carriage drew up. From it descended Aubrey Wyatt himself, his figure tall and arrogant, his features illuminated for an instant by the lantern glow. With him came the 2 clerks, their faces set in grim determination. Holmes touched my arm, his whisper taut with anticipation. Watch closely. He carries with him not merely his own guilt, but the proof of it. We followed as the group entered the office. Through the window's grime we saw them gather about the desk. Wyatt drew forth a packet, untying it with care. Holmes's lips moved soundlessly. The forged codicil. The clerks bent over it, their pens scratching as they prepared fresh attestations. Then Wyatt produced another paper, and my heart leapt, for even through the haze I recognized the crumpled outline of Rooke's copy, stolen somehow, and now destined for destruction. Holmes nodded to Lestrade. The inspector signalled his men, who moved swiftly to surround the building. Holmes himself slipped to the door, his hand upon the latch, his whole body taut as a drawn bow. For a moment we waited, the muffled voices within growing louder as Wyatt exulted in his triumph. Then Holmes flung the door wide, and we burst inside. The scene was one I shall never forget. Wyatt stood with the packet of papers held above a brazier, in which a coal fire glowed. His face, lit from beneath by the flame, wore the rapt expression of a zealot offering sacrifice. The clerks froze, their pens still poised. Holmes's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Drop it, Mr. Wyatt. Your ashes have spoken enough." Wyatt started, the papers fluttering from his hand. Lestrade's men closed about him, seizing the clerks before they could flee. For an instant Wyatt's mask slipped, and I saw the naked fury of a man whose schemes lay in ruins. "You fools," he spat, "you meddle in matters beyond you. This estate is mine by right, and no court will say otherwise." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes glittering. "By right?" "No, sir, by forgery and threat. We have the testimony of Finch, who carried your letters. We have Rook's copy of the true codicil. We have Dr. Vale, who witnessed it with his own hand. And now we have you, caught in the very act of consigning truth to flame. The salamander boasts that it cannot be consumed by fire, but tonight you will learn that justice is no creature of ashes." Lestrade clapped his hand upon Wyatt's shoulder, snapping the irons into place. The clerks hung their heads, their bravado vanished. The brazier hissed as Holmes quenched it with a pitcher of water, scattering sparks across the stone floor. As we emerged into the night, the fog parted for a moment, revealing the river gleaming darkly under the moon. Wyatt was bundled into the waiting carriage, his curses echoing in the chill air. Holmes stood for a time, his gaze fixed upon the water, then turned to me with a curious softness in his eyes. "Do you see, Watson, how vanity undoes itself?" Had Wyatt been content to rest upon his false codicil, he might have dragged the case through Chancery for years. But his pride demanded ashes, his folly demanded emblems of flame. In the end, he betrayed himself more surely than any clue I could have contrived. I nodded, struck by the truth of it. The fire had consumed not paper, but the man who set it. And as the night closed about us, I felt once more the awe that always came upon me when I saw Holmes's genius bring order out of darkness and justice out of ashes. Lestrade's triumph was of the hearty, uncomplicated sort that sits well upon an honest man, and I make him no reproach for it. Yet when we had seen Wyatt safely bestowed at the yard and returned to Baker Street in the small hours, I observed that Holmes's satisfaction was of a sterner cast. He neither exulted nor relaxed, but stood with his back to the fire, head bowed and eyes remote, as though listening for some note that had not yet sounded. "You are not content?" I ventured at last. "My dear fellow," said he, rousing with a faint smile, "content is the virtue of the historian. We are still players upon the stage. I have long suspected that the ashes were meant to conceal two fires, one of paper and one of life. The first we have quenched, the second is the question on which this case turns." "You mean Sir Giles's death?" "Precisely. Wyatt's bravado made a torch of his own hand, but men do not forge wills unless the ground has been prepared for them. Consider. An earlier codicil, witnessed by Vale and Rook, a later instrument, witnessed by Wyatt's creatures, the physician abruptly dismissed, the foreman threatened into silence. It is a sequence, Watson, not a jumble." Before I could respond, there came a rap at the door, and Mr. Gervase Latham was shown in, grave, composed, and with that lawyerly air which contrives to be excited only in the tone of repression. "I have the charge particulars from Lestrade," said he. "If half of what you report be borne out, Mr. Holmes, my client will be secure. And yet—" The man's lips thinned. "I confess to uneasiness. It is not like Gerald Wycherley to cast his lot with so raw a scoundrel as young Wyatt. He is a wary opponent. Either his judgment has failed him, or there is something we do not yet perceive." Holmes's eyes brightened. "You relieve me, Mr. Latham, of the need to appear ungrateful by saying so myself. Pray tell me, on the last night of Sir Giles's life, was there any unusual arrangement in his room? A fire in the grate, a screen, a brazier?" Latham looked surprised. "I cannot say, but the housekeeper, Mrs. Enderby, is a brisk woman, with a memory like a ledger. Would you have her fetched?" "Spare her the journey," Holmes returned. "We shall go to her." It was late morning when our cab turned into the avenue of elms before Carston House, a solid, square mansion whose severe frontage looked out upon a lawn already silvered by the first hints of winter. Mrs. Enderby received us with stiff civility that softened the moment Holmes addressed her as though he had known her from childhood, and praised the ordered economy of her stores, which, heaven forgive me, he deduced from the neat stowage of coal scuttles and the absence of ash upon the step. "In the matter of the master's last days, ma'am," he said gently, "I rely on your recollection more than upon any ledger." She bridled, flattered and fortified at once. "Sir Giles took to his bed 3 weeks before the end. Dr. Vale was constant till the new gentleman came. On the last night the room was warm enough, though the air was chill. Mr. Wyatt sent in a brazier for the master's comfort, he said. I protested. "Begging your pardon, sir, I know my business. The chimneys draw ill in a west wind." But Mr. Wyatt would have it. He and the 2 clerks were with Sir Giles much of the evening. When they had gone, I found the fire-screen moved and soot upon the lace. I had a sharp word with Jem in the scullery for being slack with the flues. He swore he had swept them proper. The master, her voice faltered. He slept poorly and was gone by dawn. Holmes had listened with that grave attention which women find more comforting than sympathy. "And the brazier, ma'am?" "In the attic now, sir." "I would not have it in the house. May I see it?" Presently it stood upon the floor before us, a tripod thing of iron, its shallow pan blackened and stained. Holmes bent over it as a naturalist over a specimen. He scraped a smear with his knife, sniffed it, and touched the blade with a drop from a little vial. A faint, sickly discoloration crept across the steel. "Coal," I said, for the reek of it clung. Yet even as I spoke, I knew I missed his mark. "Coke," Holmes corrected softly. "And more than coke. Note, Watson, the glossy tarry glaze at the lip, by-products of the gasworks, the same filth we smelt in Southwark. Now observe the vent in the hearth." He crossed to the chimney, knelt, and from the back of the flue drew forth with the point of his knife a wad of fibrous lint, matted with, my heart leapt, threads of pink ribbon. Mrs. Enderby cried out, "How came that there? Jem, you idle rascal!" "He's innocent," Holmes said. This was not neglect, but contrivance. The flue was throttled, a brazier was lit, a sick man lay in a room made snug against a west wind. Dr. Vale, you recall, heard the rattle in the lungs and called it inflammation. But a physician is not a mechanical draught. Carbonic oxide, Watson, the silent thief. A gentle suffocation masked by a failing breath. Who supplied the brazier? Mr. Wyatt. Who stood watch that evening? Mr. Wyatt and his 2 clerks. Who dismissed the physician that he might not question what his conscience dimly felt? Mr. Wyatt, Mrs. Enderby had gone very white. "Murder?" she whispered. Holmes's face took on that implacable cast I have seen when a line has been passed beyond all tolerance. I do not lightly speak the word, but if a man closes a vent and lights a fire in a room where an ailing gentleman lies, knowing the chimneys draw ill, knowing moreover the properties of the very fuel he employs, then I say he plays engineer to death. I do not add the law's epithets, they are Lestrade's province. We left the house with Mrs. Enderby's reluctant blessing to disturb no further her peace or memory. In the cab, Holmes sat silent only a moment. Then the torrent came. "You perceive why Wyatt burned papers with such zest?" He is a zealot of combustion, but zealots have priests. Wyatt the younger supplied the brazier and bullied the servants. His clerks witnessed what they were told. Who taught him the use of coke for a sick room? Who schooled him in the niceties of evidence and arranged the later codicil to glide through probate like a skater on the Serpentine? Who, if balked, would be first to urge that the inconvenient physician be spirited to a warehouse and lectured with fists? Not a tradesman, a tactician. Wycherley, Watson, Latham doubted him, I murmured. But surely a barrister. Barristers are men, and some love victory more ardently than law. Wycherley never carries a blade he can hire another to wield. He has let Wyatt blister his hands that he might keep his own cool. We shall warm them. Yet he dispatched a note to Lestrade at once, and another, couched in that bland, almost fatuous tone which deceived so many, to Mr. Gerald Wycherley. A courteous request that, in the interests of dispatch, Mr. Holmes would be obliged if opposing counsel would attend, with all papers, at Dr. Vale's rooms that evening to settle certain medical formalities before the magistrate, that an affidavit of attendance on the late Sir Giles was to be sworn, that Mr. Holmes, having recovered a portion of Sir Giles's personal diary respecting the sick-room arrangements, desired to reconcile dates. The sting lay beneath the velvet. Sir Giles's diary had been mentioned to no living soul, yet, as Holmes said with a grim curl of the lip, rascals hear whispers where honest men hear none. He took other measures that afternoon which I did not then fathom. He sent Billy with a parcel to Vale's lodging, and himself went out in a disguise so casual as to be no more than a rearrangement of expression, the bend of a shoulder, the cast of the eye. When he returned at dusk, his hands smelt faintly of oil and twine, and his spirits, if I read him rightly, were as taut as a wire. At the appointed hour we were in Dr. Vale's rooms off the Strand, a modest suite whose windows looked upon a narrow court. Holmes had insisted that the lamps be turned low and the curtains drawn. He placed Vale in an inner chamber with Mrs. Hudson, whom he had dragged into our adventure with an apology I do not think she desired, and set me in the sitting-room with a medical bag upon my knee. On the table lay a leather notebook with broken strap, Billy's parcel, a pen, and a bottle of ink. The coals burned low. Holmes took up a position by the door, lean and loose as a cat. "He will come," he said, rather to the room than to us. "If he ignores the summons, he risks nothing but courtesy. If he answers it, he risks everything. Vanity will decide we had not long to wait." A foot creaked upon the stair. A hand tested the latch with a lawyer's delicacy, and Mr. Gerald Wycherley entered, smooth, assured, and with a face so composed that I marvelled to think he had ever raised his voice. Only his eyes, too bright and too cold, betrayed him. "Dr. Vale," said he, with a glance about the room that counted its shadows. "Mr. Holmes." Holmes bowed as though in a drawing-room. "Mr. Wycherley, I am honoured. You have shown a zeal for expedition that does credit to your profession." He indicated the chair by the table. Wycherley took it without protest, laying his gloves neatly beside the pen. His gaze flicked to the notebook, Sir Giles's diary, and away again so swiftly that another man might have missed it. He inquired with exquisite politeness after the health of our witness, and whether the magistrate would be ready upon the morrow. He remarked upon the fog. He was the very mirror of probity. Holmes answered him in kind for 5 minutes by the clock, and then the play began. He took up the notebook, riffled its leaves as though to assure himself of a page, and then placed it precisely at Wycherley's elbow while he crossed to the mantel-shelf to adjust the clock. It was done with such artless unconcern that I, who knew his purpose, felt my breath grow shallow. The room was still, the coal hissed, a cab rattled and faded. Wycherley's hand moved. It was the barest brush of a finger upon leather, as innocent as the tapping of a brief while counsel thinks how best to phrase a question. The finger-tap became a thumb upon the edge, The thumb became a palm that, in the act of drawing the volume nearer, contrived the smoothness of a practiced theft. He had it. In the same motion he rose. "I fear I must not detain you," he murmured. "The hour grows late." "And the evidence grows hot," Holmes observed, turning with a swiftness that was almost lazy. "Pray resume your seat, Mr. Wycherley. You will find the page you require between the covers." Wycherley smiled. "I require nothing, Mr. Holmes. Then your clients are more fortunate than I supposed." Holmes's tone hardened. "Lestrade." The door from the landing opened. The inspector entered with 2 men at his back, his ruddy face alight with the keen relish of the sportsman who has stepped upon the covert at the perfect instant. Wycherley did not start. He merely set the notebook down again with that same neatness with which he had laid his gloves. "On what charge?" he inquired, a chill amusement in his tone. "For conspiracy to defraud and for your part in the unlawful detention of Dr. Vale," Holmes replied. "As for the smaller matters, tampering with evidence, suborning perjury, we shall stack them like billets upon the brazier. The blaze will be handsome. You have nothing," Wycherley said pleasantly. "A clerk's confession, a foreman's copy, a physician whose memory will wilt beneath cross-examination. You underestimate the elasticity of facts when stretched upon the rack of law." "Do I?" Holmes returned. He stepped to the table and, with the point of his knife, lifted from the spine of the notebook a thread, no human hair, but a strand of crimson caught in the hinge. "You did not know, I think, that Sir Giles's diary is no diary at all, but a decoy, that the true book, which records the introduction of a brazier and the dismissal of his physician upon your counsel, is already in Mr. Latham's strong-box, and that this volume you were so kind as to touch bears, along its binding, a preparation of lamp-black, wax and rosemary oil, used by engravers to take impressions. Your fingers, Mr. Wycherley, will carry its caress as clearly as the salamander crest has kissed your wax." For the first time the man's composure fissured. It was the smallest crack, but I saw the cold in his eyes go from iron to ice. "Inspector," Holmes finished, "you will find at Carston House a flue stopped with rag and ribbon, and in Mrs. Enderby's attic the brazier that married Gasworks coke to a sick man's breath. You will find, too, in a Suffolk warehouse, 2 ruffians who will suddenly remember the voice that paid their wages. Mr. Wycherley is a master of the eloquent silence. Let us see how it reads in the dock." Lestrade laid a hand upon the barrister's arm. Wycherley looked down at it as though it were an insect, then raised his eyes to Holmes. "You have a taste for emblem, Mr. Holmes," he said softly. "Be careful you do not make one of yourself." Holmes bowed. "I am content to be remembered, sir, if the dead may be at peace and the living inherit without breathing smoke." They led him out, not in irons. Lestrade knows a theatrical from a necessity, but with a firmness that admitted no appeal. When the door had closed, Holmes let out a breath I had not known he held, and the set of his shoulders softened. "The board is cleared," he said. "Tomorrow the court will see our salamanders with their firepots. Tonight, sleep, Watson. There remains only to arrange the final pattern and to allow the ashes to cool where they lie." The following morning broke with a cold brightness, the sort of day when London seems scrubbed raw after weeks of fog, and the very clarity of the air seemed to lend new sharpness to Holmes's movements. He had been up since dawn, arranging his notes, drafting memoranda for Lestrade, and dictating to Billy with a speed that left the boy's hand aching. When at last I came down from my room, I found him standing at the mantel, pipe abandoned, fingers restless, the very embodiment of a man poised upon the brink of conclusion. "All the pieces lie before us, Watson," he said, without preamble. "What remains is to assemble them into a form the law can grasp. A judge does not care for symbols of salamanders and ashes. He demands sequence, motive, and proof. Fortunately, our adversaries have been vain enough to supply all 3. I asked whether Lestrade had secured Wycherley, and Holmes nodded. Comfortably detained. He maintains that he acted merely as counsel, ignorant of Wyatt's extravagances. But when confronted with the brazier and the flue, his face betrayed him. He will not confess, of course. Men of his caste never do. But the evidence will speak louder than any admission. He paced to the table where lay the objects collected during our inquiry: Finch's signed confession, Rook's copy of the codicil, Vale's sworn deposition, the scorched seal, the ribbons, the soot scraped from the brazier. Each fragment was unremarkable in itself, yet arranged together they formed a chain that no jury could ignore. Holmes regarded them with a satisfaction that was almost austere. Do you see, Watson? Each piece of ash becomes a coal, each coal a flame, until the conflagration lights the truth. Sir Giles was not merely the victim of sickness, but of design. Wyatt provided the fuel, Wycherley the cunning, the clerks their signatures, and poor Finch the hand that carried their threats. It is a conspiracy built upon fire, yet betrayed by its own smoke. He broke off as Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon a tray. Holmes glanced at it and raised his brows. Miss Margaret Brabazon, the heiress herself. Admit her, the young lady who entered carried herself with a dignity that might have been mistaken for coldness, had not the tears in her eyes betrayed the depth of her relief. She was tall, pale, and plainly dressed, but there was an air of quiet strength about her that reminded me of the best of the old families. She clasped Holmes's hand fervently. Mr. Holmes, Mr. Watson, I was told you have saved not only my inheritance but my uncle's honour. I scarce know how to thank you. Holmes inclined his head with uncharacteristic gentleness. Your gratitude is better reserved for the men who risked much to speak the truth. Rook, Vale, and even young Chalmers, whose courage in coming to me set all in motion. As for myself, I have merely followed the ashes until they revealed the fire. She faltered, then said in a low voice, It is not the estate that moves me, but the knowledge that my uncle's wishes will be respected. He loved me as a daughter, and I could not bear to think his voice stifled by falsehood. Holmes's gaze softened, but only for a moment. You will do well to hold that thought, Miss Brabazon, for there will be noise and scandal before the end. Yet truth, once kindled, burns steadily. When she had gone, Holmes turned to me with an expression I had rarely seen, a mingling of satisfaction and weariness. It is always thus, Watson. Behind the grandeur of estates and the pomp of law lies the simple cry of loyalty betrayed. That is the true crime, and it is why I pursue these matters with such fervour. By afternoon we were summoned to the yard, where Lestrade awaited us with visible relish. He led us to an interview chamber where Wyatt sat sullen and pale, his once arrogant bearing reduced to a kind of resentful silence. At the other end sat Wycherley, still immaculate, still urbane, yet with a tightness about the lips that betrayed strain. Holmes, said Lestrade, they'll hear nothing. But I thought you might care to take a final turn with them before I draw up the charges. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Indeed, shall he crossed to Wyatt and stood over him like a hawk above a rabbit. Mr. Wyatt, your letters have betrayed you. The boy Finch carried them, the seal and ribbon condemn you, and the brazier proves your hand in Sir Giles's death. You may cling to silence, but when the court hears the testimony of Vale and Rook, your fortune will melt faster than wax upon flame. Wyatt muttered something inaudible and turned his face away. Holmes let him be and turned to Wycherley. As for you, sir, he said in tones of steel, your crime is colder, but no less damning. You sought not merely to enrich your client, but to extinguish truth itself. You counselled the dismissal of the physician, arranged the false witnesses, and when all else failed, contrived to silence those who remembered. Do you deny it? Wycherley smiled faintly. Mr. Holmes, you are eloquent, but eloquence is not evidence. Holmes leaned closer. Evidence? We have your touch upon the decoy diary, preserved with indelible preparation. We have the testimony of 2 ruffians who will swear you paid them to abduct Vale. We have your presence at Carston House on the very night the brazier was lit. You may weave rhetoric, but the rope is already knotted. For the first time Wycherley's composure slipped. A flush rose to his cheek, and his eyes flickered. Holmes straightened. You see, Lestrade, even silence has its eloquence. As we left the yard, the inspector could not contain his admiration. By George, Mr. Holmes, you've done it again. The judge will have no choice but to convict. Holmes merely shook his head. Conviction is the law's affair. I am content that Sir Giles's ashes may rest at last. That evening back at Baker Street, Holmes allowed himself the rare indulgence of languor. He stretched upon the settee, eyes closed, violin in hand, and let the low notes drift through the room like smoke dispersing after a fire. I sat by the hearth, recording the last particulars in my notebook, when he spoke suddenly. You see, Watson, the world believes I delight in puzzles for their own sake. But it is not so. What delights me is to restore order where others have sown ruin. The ashes of this case were meant to silence, but they spoke louder than words. They told us of fire, of vanity, of guilt, and now they are cold. There was a long pause, broken only by the violin's sigh. At last he added, almost to himself, Yet somewhere in London tonight another fire is kindling. We shall see where its smoke drifts, and with that enigmatic remark he drew the bow once more across the strings, while outside the city moved on, heedless that in a quiet room on Baker Street a man had again turned ashes into truth. The magistrate's court was crowded the following day, for news of Wyatt's arrest had travelled with that alacrity which attends every tale of money and scandal in London. A murmur ran through the gallery as Holmes and I took our places. Beside Mr. Latham and young Chalmers, while opposite us Wycherley sat with the impeccable gravity of a monument, and Wyatt, sallow and drawn, stared fixedly at the floor. Dr. Vale and Thomas Rooke had been lodged close at hand, guarded and nervous but resolute. Lestrade, ruddy with the confidence of a well-netted case, hovered at the elbow of the Crown solicitor. The magistrate, a dry, keen-eyed man, looked upon the assembly with a cold civility which promised little patience for theatricals. What followed was less a performance than an unspooling of inevitabilities, each thread taking hold where the last left off. Finch's confession was read first, the boy's clumsy pride plain in the phrases by which he had damned himself and named his paymaster. The scorched ribbon ends and fused red wax were produced and laid upon the green baize with a humility that belied their significance. Rooke spoke next, voice thick with the strain of fear overcome, and held up his rough copy of the earlier codicil, as one might display a battered relic rescued from a fire. Then came Vale, pale still, but with the physician's composure restored. He told, without embroidery, how Sir Giles had dictated and signed the paper, bestowing his estate upon Miss Brabazon, how he and Rooke had witnessed how a week later he had been supplanted by strangers and dismissed without cause. Wyatt's counsel objected and objected again, questioning memory, suggesting confusion, hinting at resentment, but each objection fell flat beneath the steady, prosaic weight of converging fact. When the brazier itself was carried in, black pan dulled, tripod legs speckled with a glaze seen only in certain industrial cokes, a faint stir passed through the room. Holmes did not rise, he merely indicated with the lightest inclination of his head the wad of ribbon and lint Lestrade's men had found in the flue. The magistrate leaned forward. The court could all but feel the draught stifled, the slow, sweet murder accomplished under the guise of comfort. It was then that the Crown solicitor invited Holmes to speak to the sequence, as to a man whose reputation might steady the lay mind where technicalities had jostled it. Holmes rose without flourish. If he has ever displayed a vanity in court, I have missed it. His manner was that of a teacher imposing order upon a set of facts that wished to go each his own way. "You have heard what was done," he said quietly. "Permit me to show you how we knew it. There are 4 groups of facts. The first concerns the ashes sent to Mr. Chalmers. They contained 3 distinguishable elements: the flat, sooty residue of charred rag paper, the granular white of bone char, and minute beads of remelted sealing wax bearing the crest used by the Wyatts, a salamander amid flames. Bone char is rare in a household fire, but common at gasworks where it is used in filtration. The odour of naphtha clung to the envelope. A ribbon end within was fused, as if burned, while still binding a bundle. From these trifles we infer a message scooped from some industrial fire, assembled with theatrical affectation, and sent by a hand accustomed to the works. Mr. Finch, who runs errands for the Southwark installation, obligingly confirmed the rest. The second group concerns the will. An earlier codicil existed. Mr. Rooke kept a copy, and Dr. Vale witnessed the original. A later codicil purported to revoke it, witnessed by Mr. Wyatt's clerks, that paper's convenience to Mr. Wyatt, together with his haste to intimidate those who might support the earlier instrument, speaks for itself. Yet forgery alone was not enough to account for the heat and rashness of his methods. Men forge, they do not for a mere forgery, abduct physicians and light brazier fires by night. The third concerns Sir Giles's death. Mrs. Enderby's testimony shows a brazier brought at Mr. Wyatt's order, a fire screen moved, soot upon the lace, and a room sealed against a west wind on a chimney known to draw ill. The flue we found throttled with rag and ribbon. Carbonic oxide is tasteless, invisible, and lethally gentle. Sir Giles died in his bed with a sound in his lungs that even a conscientious physician might mistake for the progress of disease. But the timing, the later codicil signed that very night by clerks beholden to Mr. Wyatt, betrays the design. The fourth is the hand that knit the pattern. Mr. Wyatt provided muscle and motive, but the arrangement of witnesses, the calculated dismissal of the physician whose conscience might stir, the selection of a method that leaves as little trace as possible, these smell of the law's cold intelligence. Mr. Wycherley will say he knew nothing. Perhaps he did not know the details, for such men never soil their cuffs with the soot they employ. They deal in phrases that open doors and in hints that suggest outcomes. They retire before the flame, then warm their hands at its profit. It is my opinion that Mr. Wycherley's ignorance was of that elegant and culpable sort which instructs without writing a word. There was a rustle, and Wycherley's eyes flashed for the first time. Holmes inclined his head to the bench. I submit that the Crown's case is not a romance of symbols, but a sequence: intimidation by ash, suppression of witnesses, a death arranged with fuel from a trade the defendants knew, and a will produced at the very bed in which that death was accomplished. He sat. The magistrate, whose face had remained a mask of attention, wrote for a long minute. When he spoke, there was no rhetoric in him either. He bound both defendants over for trial on charges that left little to ambiguity: conspiracy, forgery, perversion of justice, and in Wyatt's case, a count that made Miss Brabazon's lips press together in a brief, controlled shudder. The court adjourned amid a hum. Wycherley, as he passed, inclined his head to Holmes with the ghost of a smile that had lost its temperature. Wyatt stumbled, and a warder held his elbow. Outside in the pale sunlight, Miss Brabazon found us again. She did not speak at first. She merely took Holmes's hand between both of hers, and the look she gave him, steady, grateful, unbewildered by either scandal or fortune, was one I have seldom seen rendered in language. Holmes received it gravely. "You will have a vexing season," he said. "Solicitors will require signatures, newspapers will invent, cousins will remember you. If you are wise, you will go into the country for a month and let London find another story." She smiled with a composure beyond her years. "I think I shall go to my uncle's house and open the windows." When she had gone, Lestrade clapped Holmes's shoulder with unpolished admiration. "Neat as a pin, Mr. Holmes. If I could bottle that method of yours, I'd retire to Margate." "It would go flat upon the shelf," Holmes returned, but he permitted himself a glint of amusement. The method is nothing without trifles and patience. You may have both for the price of walking with your head up and your senses awake. We dined early that evening, Holmes in one of those rare good humours that soften the angles of his nature. He toyed with the violin afterward, but did not play. Instead, he lay back with closed eyes, and when I thought him asleep, he spoke, not to me, but to the ceiling. It is an odd thing, Watson, how often the instrument of a crime announces the criminal's character. Knives belong to hot blood, poison to cold calculation, fire is the vice of vanity. Our salamanders were vain. Had they not sent a letter sealed with ashes, we might have spent weeks proving what their bravado proved in a day. They called the flame to witness, and the flame gave them away. You had them from the beginning, I said. From the second pinch of ash, he corrected lazily. The first I accounted to melodrama, the second smelt of gas. After that, I had only to be patient while they performed themselves. I could not help but laugh softly. And the diary which Mr. Wycherley so obligingly fingered. He opened one eye. Billy and I mixed the dressing at noon. Rosemary oil carries the lampblack without cloying. The engraver in the arcade taught me the trick years ago. It is a pity to descend to stagecraft, but the stage demanded a cue. Mr. Wycherley is a stickler for propriety. He could not resist setting a stray volume straight. He rose, restless again, and went to the window. Baker Street in the late hour carries a homely music, the clip of hooves, the call of a muffin man, the last clatter of a cab. Holmes stood listening, as if the city were a great instrument, and he meant to pluck from it the next theme. "You are content now?" I asked him. "As far as my work permits contentment," he said, turning with a smile that had in it something of winter sunshine. "There is no perfect justice in this world, only degrees of restoration. We have given Miss Brabazon her uncle's will, and Sir Giles his breath back in the eyes of men. That will serve." He lit his pipe, and the blue wreaths rose and mingled with the lamplight. For a time we were silent. Then he added, almost lightly, "I think I shall send Mrs. Hudson to her sister for a week. The house needs fewer ashes. And you?" He shrugged. "There is a gentleman from Bombay who has mislaid a jewel that will not stay lost. A governess in Bayswater who writes that her employer keeps strange hours. A pawnbroker in Clerkenwell. No, Watson, do not reach for your hat. Tonight we rest." He took up the violin at last and drew from it a simple air, no bravura, no show, only a quiet line that seemed to thread together all we had seen, the blackened seal, the ribbon in the flue, the tired courage of a physician, the square jaw of a foreman who had kept a copy for his conscience, the steady hand of a young barrister, the unassuming dignity of an heiress who wished only for windows opened. When he set the instrument down, his face had lost its tautness. "Order restored," he murmured. "Until the next," I said. His eyes twinkled. "Until the next, my dear fellow." And so ended the affair of the letter sealed with ashes, a case in which smoke, far from hiding the flame, pointed unerringly to it, and in which, as so often in my friend's practice, the smallest cinders bore the weight of the greatest truth. The trial, when it came, was a foregone conclusion. The jury listened gravely as the chain of evidence was laid before them, each link forged from the trifles Holmes had gathered with such relentless precision. Finch's confession, Rook's courage, Vale's testimony, all stood together like the stones of a causeway across which no argument could pass. Wyatt's face grew greyer with each witness, and Wycherley, though still immaculate in dress, sat motionless as the verdict was read, guilty upon every count. The younger man collapsed into his seat, while the elder merely inclined his head as though acknowledging the inevitable checkmate of a long-played game. Miss Brabazon inherited her uncle's estate unchallenged, and with it the vindication of his name. She followed Holmes's counsel and withdrew quietly to the country, shunning the prying eyes of the press. In her letter of thanks she wrote simply that Sir Giles might now rest in peace, unchoked by lies or smoke. Holmes read it once, tucked it into his violin case and said no more. As for Dr. Vale, the trial restored his reputation, and he returned to his practice with a steadiness born of ordeal. Rook, too, found himself commended for honesty, and Holmes contrived, through one of those discreet interventions he never admitted, to secure him a foreman's post in another firm far from Wyatt's corrupting shadow. Young Chalmers, once so shaken, walked with a new confidence, having seen that truth could prevail when allied with courage. One evening, some weeks later, I remarked that Holmes ought to take satisfaction in such results, for had he not wrested order from chaos and brought justice where ashes had nearly buried all? He smiled faintly, the blue smoke of his pipe curling about his face. "My dear Watson," said he, "I take no joy in the ruin of men, even rogues. But I will say this. When vanity cloaks itself in fire, it cannot help but betray the hand that feeds it. The salamander thought to stride unscathed through flame, yet in the end it was consumed by the very ashes it scorned. That perhaps is justice enough." He reached for his violin and drew from it a slow, contemplative air, soft as the settling of embers after a blaze. I sat listening, and as the melody faded into silence, I knew the case of the letter sealed with ashes had burned itself out, leaving behind not ruin, but clarity, a testament to Holmes's gift for finding truth where others saw only smoke. Thus ended the case of the letter sealed with ashes.